Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz guitarist, composer, arranger, and educator David Howard. We caught up with him about his latest 2021 CD called Next, a sound influenced by many great jazz, blues, and funk artists as he leads his fresh and restless urban jazz fusion neo-soul hybrid ensemble. Prior to the pandemic, he performed throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. He recently retired as a professor at the Berklee College of Music in Boston and continues to keep the magic going. Enjoy his story.
Good to talk to you.
Yeah, same here. It's when Carrie messaged me, and I said, "Oh wow, I have heard of this. I've heard of Neon Jazz." So it's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure.
Oh, cool.
So I thought it'd be great to tell you because I have heard of it. I've been so busy with pushing the CD out. I mean, we could talk more about it, but
I did hear it, and I really wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah, it's a little different. 7 tunes. It's kind of short and I'm old school. I put out CDs as opposed to. I guess I've started putting out single tunes, but we can talk more about that. I've tried different things or different routes before when doing this. And this is the first time I've used Carrie, and I'm really enjoying it. I mean, the process has been delightful. First of all, she is just amazing to deal with. Very, very easy to deal with. And in this day and age, everything's changed. And I guess it's changed for you too, excuse me.
Thank you very much, David, for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I'm looking forward to talking about the album and your life and music, too. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Your newest album, 2021's Next, it's a mix of a lot of things, and as you've kind of mentioned before, it's kind of a unique sound for you. I guess before we get into it, talk to me a little bit about the timing of this. I mean, we're obviously in the middle of a pandemic, and, when this began, it was like, well, we're releasing an album without knowing the world's going to shut down and we won't be able to do live music, and that's migrated into 2021 where it's like, we know we're not going to do live music. Maybe this is a way of being in front of the people like a live show.
Yeah, I mean, I've done my share of some radio shows. When we get back, I'm going to be doing a streaming show from a great location, a club called The Parlor in Rhode Island, and that should be a fairly large stream. The other cool thing about that location is it is one of the best sound systems of clubs that I've played lately, and it's really good. The other plus is the club owner is an ex-student of mine. And I don't know if you know this, but I just retired from being a professor at Berklee College of Music for 33 years. During this retirement thing, which was kind of at the end of getting the CD ready to be pushed out, I had said, well, I have more material, let me include it. But then my friend who does a lot of my promotion, Keith Gilchrist, had said, no, let's do it this way. And so I had first taken the real feel, which is the real, and that's, I kind of gone off in a different direction, which is really like a James Brown thing. And that's why the CD is so different. There's so many different kind of styles on it, which is a little bit different than I usually do. I usually follow, if you look at the previous CD called Infinite Blue, they're all somewhat related, and it was in one writing period. Okay. I really wanted to do a mixture, and so toward the end of this, I got involved in finishing up the last tune, which is No Boundaries, and I was collaborating with Audley Reed and Brendan Rothwell. Brendan's in Canada, Audley's in Chicago, and the whole thing of doing music this way is such a new thing, and I'm actually really embracing it, enjoying it a lot. With the right players that have the facilities like what I have. Since I retired, I beefed up my home studio, and it's really not that large, but it's what I call more of a production suite where I'm able to do all the guitar parts and a lot of mixing and mastering here, but I'm able to do vocal things if I wanted to. But really, in the pandemic, I've only been doing guitar. But I can take stems or sessions from other musicians and collaborate. So that was happening, and I was really happy about that tune because that tune was much different than the other ones on the CD. The whole thing about this CD, there was so much of it that was done in the pandemic. Now, there's portions of it, it's interesting because there were portions that were done live, and then between myself and Mike Johnson and the other guys that were in the band at the time, I was able to adapt them. So I was able to take certain tracks that were done live and then overdub or track them. So that worked out. And again, this is all was kind of a new process. The other thing too, Joe, is I'm so used to, like I said earlier, and I don't know if you record this part, but it was so much the idea of putting out a CD and then pushing it up and playing the tunes live and seeing how they work and feeling them out maybe before and then doing the recording. But this CD has been very much, or a good portion of it, the other way around. So they were written and everything that I do, it's written out chart-wise. So the guys that I play with and that are doing the streaming thing that I mentioned have the charts. So it's different in that way. And there's one tune called Lonesome Lockdown, which is really dedicated to this whole thing. And it was written and recorded all in one day. So a completely different thing for me. So that type of idea. But I am really enjoying, I guess I shouldn't say this, I mean, not so much the lockdown, I'm enjoying the whole idea of being able to collaborate like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that this pandemic or this lockdown has opened up like collaborative doors that may have been closed before. And I think one thing I'm thinking as you're talking about this is I definitely get a sense of a cathartic joy that went into this is that at the end of the day, you know, I know this is a tough period, but it almost seemed like these kinds of albums that are coming out and these projects are almost providing some sort of therapy and joy within itself.
Yeah, well, Lonesome Lockdown, I said to myself, it was interesting because I usually write with guitar, piano, sit to the guitar and piano. And for that tune, I came up to the studio and it was more driven by a texture on the keyboard. The guitar was later. And you could tell by the melancholiness, does that make sense, of the chord change and everything going on in that, where I was at headwise. And I really didn't set out to think or set out with the idea that I'm going to do the tune, this, that, and this, because usually, like I said, the process is usually I'll sit at guitar or piano and write it down first, notate it first on score paper, manuscript paper. And that's always been a process which maybe for some is an older process. Now, I'm familiar because I taught at Berklee all these years that a way a lot of musicians do it, and I've collaborated with a lot of musicians that do it different, and the sequencer and all the tools in the studio are just that, tools to compose with, where I'll compose on the guitar, piano, then bring the chart either up to the studio here and do some MIDI tracks, which are just guidelines, and I'll do my guitar tracks, decide, who's collaborating on, or who's going to do the other tracks, what instruments I'm going to have, and that kind of thing. Now on Lonesome Lockdown, I just went with the whole idea, no, I'm going to do this all myself. And that got to be, the tunes became more of yeah, I want to do something by myself. I want to do a funk tune. I really have something that's kind of in the more contemporary smooth jazz thing. I got a more straight ahead tune, and I have a ballad that I've played with the band for years called Blondes. That is the Carl Bley tune. I have another tune called Hard Facts that I wrote years ago. And that I went over during the COVID thing and recorded saxophone with a saxophone player, overdubbing it.
So I'm always curious to go back to the beginnings of how all of these jazz or the music seeds were planted in you, kind of where you were born and raised, and kind of how your childhood got you to this point where you love music and it's your profession.
When I was quite young, my father played piano. My father was a doctor, but for his enjoyment, he played piano. It was interesting. He didn't really play classical music, and he wasn't a real heavily trained musician, and he definitely wasn't a professional musician. But as a child, we'd go to bed at night. My mother would put us to bed, and my father would practice piano. It was kind of an interesting thing. You know, you never heard her say, could you not practice, let the kids sleep? And we were upstairs, and so there were so many nights where I'd go to sleep or fall asleep listening to music, and it was popular tunes of the day back in the 60s. I was born in '54, so get the age now. But so that was one big part of it. When I started taking guitar when I was 7, studying guitar, and you know, there were a lot of different things that came into play. You know, I was young. You want to be outside, you want to play baseball, you want to do that stuff. But the guitar did, and music did take the front seat. You know, so. And I found I wasn't that good at baseball anyhow. But so I got my first guitar. I was studying guitar, and then in elementary school, I played in orchestra, and it was I don't remember the tunes, but they weren't anything. That happened, and then in high school, I played in what was called dance band, and we played Quinnipiac Jazz Festival, the high school competition, and I don't even remember getting close to any kind of into the competitive part of it. Didn't even seem to faze me, but I remember the director saying, "Oh, there's going to be 2 judges," and he said Kenny Burrell, who's a guitar player, and Sarah Vaughan. That was my first introduction to, in the same room with a incredible jazz guitarist, where I said, well, he plays a lot more notes than Hendrix and Clapton and all these guys that I was listening to. And I grew up in New Haven, so I was around Yale, and you would, I saw Hendrix live. I heard Hendrix. I heard a lot of people live. My father was more the factor that got me into jazz, because Sunday afternoons there was a jazz series, and he'd take me to as many of those as he could. I don't want to get off track, but the Kenny Burrell thing was unbelievable. And then after that, my parents bought me 4 or 5 Kenny Burrell recordings, LPs. And I remember they used to have this, I think it was a Magnavox stereo, yeah. And one of my sister's older friends my older sister's friends told me, wow, you could slow it down to really hear the tracks by taping quarters or something on the needle on the stereo. So I ruined a lot of my parents' stereo equipment, and a lot of CDs, a lot of recordings. There were no CDs. But yeah, that was one aspect. And I did play quite a bit at a young age. Like I mentioned, I had an older sister, and I'd get asked to play with various people. Growing up in New Haven and going to Hampton High School, there were some great musicians that's gone on to do a lot of things. Everett Silver played with, drummer, played with Chuck Mangione. Bob Cosen in class with me played with Buddy Rich. Michael Gregory Jackson, who I'm in touch with all the time now in California, played with a lot of people, so many people, avant-garde guitar player. And then on the other side of things, Ted Jensen, who was co-owner of Sterling Sound, who mixes and masters like Pat Metheny, Rolling Stones, and all that. So it was quite a creative environment, and like I said, I had what I consider a pretty decent music education in high school compared to what I hear with all my Berklee students that have nothing, you know. So that was a real creative factor, and I really thank my parents for that, and the teachers I had back then. And I did get to, I got to study with some great musicians too. Prior to University of Bridgeport, I studied with Sal Salvador, more of a straight ahead traditional guitar player. Played with Stan Kenton. Then I went on to study with Larry Coryell for about 2.5 years, which was amazing because it was a whole different thing, and he was very much on the scene, fusion thing. And he passed away several years ago, but still into his writing and a lot of that, which led to an interesting connection with coming up to Boston, moving to Boston, and finally, and then getting a job teaching for all these years at Berklee with the Burton connection, Pat Metheny, Larry Coryell being one of Burton's first guitar players, and then studying for quite some time with Mick Goodrick, who is just retired from Berklee a little bit before me, who's just a genius on guitar. I also, during my time, I went and got my master's at New England Conservatory, and I got to study during that time with Charlie Banakis, and I don't know if you ever heard this name, but he had a pretty cult following all over the world. Mike Stern, there was rumor that, and then Mike Brecker had talked to him and taken some lessons with him, but there was rumor that, you know, people like Miles had talked to him. He had an incredible musician, but had an incredible way of teaching and getting you to use the language of improvisation or jazz.
So you know, you've mentioned some pretty heavy names, and you've been around quite a bit. You know, a lot.
Right. I mentioned my age too.
Right.
I mentioned my age too. So.
Yes, which is good, and you accumulate wisdom over time. And my question to you is, what did you learn from the legends and luminaries that in turn you have taught younger cats that you play with?
Well, I'm going to tie this also in with something I just saw just recently. We all know Chick Corea just passed. And when I was at University of Bridgeport, I had a class with Dave Weckl, who was Chick's drummer. And don't let me get off track, but they had mentioned a lot of what I'm going to call Koreaism type things that they learned over the years of playing with Chick Corea. And it was just brought up again in the last couple of days when I was listening to this. I think out of the people that I've studied with, the main thing was, you know, speak this language with conviction. Practice, but when you get to the bandstand, play what's in your heart and what you're feeling. And it's a lot more difficult than it sounds. Because all of us have stock licks and are afraid of silence and afraid of that space. But the space is so important. Frame what you're saying and to give everybody else in the band to do something. When you're speaking and soloing and creating, to leave space for the conversation, but try to do what you do with confidence and conviction. And it's interesting because all of us you listen back to a solo and you just say, well, that wasn't too convincing, or wow, I wish I did this, or wow, why did I do that? But I remember studying with Jimmy Jufrey, the great cool jazz saxophonist. Wrote many bebop tunes. He was amazing, an amazing person to study with. And I remember, and for a long time, he was a saxophone, but his guitarist was Jim Hall, who was always a big influence, Jim Hall. And so I can remember going to a lesson and playing a thing that I wrote, some line writing, some background lines, and rewriting melodies to make them your own. Like if you take a standard tune, Just Friends, There'll Never Be Another You, or any of these standard tunes, you don't play a melody like what you saw in the fake book, and you want to make them yours. And that whole statement of making them yours was when I learned from Sal Salvador. He said, play the melodies. I want you to come in next week with 2 melodies, be able to play them. And I came in and I played it like it was written. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm playing a melody. He goes, no, make it yours. Make it yours. So next week I want you to come in with these same 2 tunes, make it yours. So he meant you had to play the melody, but add you to it, add your own interpretation. So, but I can remember, so back to the Jimmy Jufrey thing, I remember I had a lesson at the conservatory for my master's. Going in, it was pretty comfortable. He was that kind of person. But you will always, when you study with these people, you kind of go in awe. And he took out his horn and we played this, and he said, okay, let's do it again. And then I stopped and I looked at him, and he knew I was looking for some type of approval or comment. He goes, well, I forget it. He said, well, it wasn't like Jim Hall. Or he said, Jim might do it different. So it was that kind of thing. And, so there's those memories, but what I try to install in students, and whether or not, I feel like I was successful. I do have a lot of students that have kept in touch with me. Actually, I had a student from Italy talk to me this morning. Was be true to yourself. Don't try to fit into a specific style. I think you have to write for yourself, and you have to like it before anybody else can like it. And that kind of thing, where I've had students from other countries going, well, I feel like I'm sounding too much like music from my country or something. And I'd say, nothing wrong with that. That's good. That's good. Well, I want to sound more contemporary, American sounding, and I would not push that. I think it's important that they have their own voice, and finding your voice, and it's a very hard thing to do nowadays. And I still searching for my voice. And again, the other thing as a musician nowadays, you have to be so adapt to all different genres, or at least if you want to work as a young musician, you have to have the ability to chameleon into different styles, which a lot of times means you're a jack of all trades, master of none, which some people find is not the right way to go about it. But in this day and age, every style you're involved with adds into the jazz thing. It's one thing about jazz is that it grows off of conversations, and those conversations can come in from various style sources, you know. So I often found that, you know, I've talked to close friends of mine, guitar players, lately, Wilfred Freelick, who was a guitar player, was doing quite a bit. And he's involved with everything, like all different styles. So we find that that's an interesting factor. So, but anyhow, it's teaching nowadays can be a very difficult endeavor. You know, I really enjoyed it, but I found I really needed the break. And I had a lot of friends. Joe were telling me, "Oh, Dave, take a year. Don't teach at all. Don't teach." You know. And I have a lot of material on computers, a lot of material on hard drives. You know, and right now I'm really enjoying the, I'm going to say downtime, but it's not really, because I've been collaborating, and even as we speak, I mean, I'm going to take a week, but I'm in the middle of collaborating with some people now on their stuff. And also, I forgot to mention, on the CD, there's a vocal tune which I collaborate with Roseanne Sarita, which is a new thing for me, because I've wrote lyrics before and woke up the next day or checked them out 2 days later, and I just said, whoa, no, that's not going to do it. And so my son, both of my kids went through Berklee. My son was a songwriting major at Berklee and graduated and moved to Nashville for a couple of years. He is now not into the music thing. He does play, and a great guitar player, but he wrote lyrics. And I really thought at some point we were going to get involved in doing some co-writing in that. But this tune that I wrote needed lyrics. And I co-wrote and did a Manhattan Transfer type of thing on the previous CD with Mike Johnson, that did vocal arrangements, and there were 6 vocalists on it. It was very cool. And so that really led me to wanting to do something on this CD, a vocal thing. But I was leaning more towards one vocalist, really more the songwriting thing. So Your Smile came from everybody wearing a mask, and you're not able to see anybody smile.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It was just Your Smile came about.
So when we get back to live music, what do you hope we all collectively realize, both musician and audience, about this long time away from live music?
I think for me, I'm going to try to be a little bit more personal. Just even the tunes, even the introductions of tunes, it was always like playing gigs. It would always be, well, it was kind of my job because of the band, but if I didn't do it, then a lot of times Michael would, the one who did some vocal stuff. There weren't a lot of vocals, but bass player vocalist. He would chat with the audience. But I feel like I would like to do more of that. And I think in the festivals, when we're playing a festival, I tend to do that more. And be at a festival in Italy, I speak a little bit. My wife's European, born and raised in Italy. So, and I guess, are you Italian, Joe?
Yeah.
I've become Italian, and I have a lot of Italian friends in Italy. A lot. Like I said, I talked to ex-student today, and yesterday. It's all the time, almost daily. That whole idea of trying to speak Italian to an audience. I was told this by a sax player, good friend, Sal Orsino, who is not. We speak weekly, monthly, but he plays a lot when I'm over there, or plays a lot with me when I'm over there. And he said, Dave, it really means a lot to these people to have the American musician explain the origin of their recordings and what they were thinking. I found audiences in Europe tend to be much more involved in and I shouldn't say just Europe. There are a lot in the United States, but I think my reckoning with this came over there, where I really found we'd play a tune and people would come up later go, oh, this such and such tune, that brought back memories of this, and were you thinking this? And you just go, whoa, So I think that whole thing of being a little bit more personal with the audience. And I've always been one that on breaks will chat with people and that kind of thing. And a lot of it was to get feedback on the tunes and all that, and usually it was pretty positive. I think the other factor is I'm going to try to remain a sense of the amount of style. I'm not going to kind of rope it back into just playing one style. I'm really going to try to branch out. And again, with these collaborative things, it's always interesting because once you get done with these collaborative ventures, with Brandon, with Roseanne actually has done some gigs one gig, and we've talked about doing more. And she has her own CDs out, and when we did her gig, it was really cold, no rehearsal, and she had sent charts. And I gave them out to the guys in the band and talked about, well, listen, we're going to open this up for solos here. And so we got to the gig set up, and then we 15, 20 minutes to talk down the tunes. So we'd go up and we did 3 or 4 of my tunes and then call her up and do 4 or 5 of her tunes and then end up the set with, 2 of my tunes or something. But the whole idea of going up without a rehearsal and hitting on these tunes was great, and they were different than her recording, but everybody was on it enough to kind of keep it that way and make it different. But it worked, and it worked great. And the following day, we actually did a rehearsal and played some more, which was kind of interesting because we said, yeah, the rehearsal was after the gig. But type of thing where I involve maybe a larger situation, larger ensembles. Again, we're going to have to see what happens when we go back. I mean, I've heard that, it's going to be tough to have multiple musicians on stage. Is it going to be duos, trios? For the streaming thing that is going to happen the end of April, I'm actually putting together a larger ensemble, so it's going to be a little bit different, just instrumentation wise. So I'm looking forward to that. That's kind of different. But again, it's like I was saying, we're going to have to see what happens for gigs and if they let you come back with a larger ensembles or let you do that kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to it being a little bit different or be able to do stuff a little bit different because of the COVID kind of collaborative thing. I think the other thing too is for 2.5 years before COVID, I had a steady Friday night gig, and it was almost walking distance from my house. And it was a 2.5 hour gig. And I would do it most of the time with Michael Johnson, who played guitar or bass, and sang a lot of the tunes. Most of the tunes we did instrumentally in the beginning. And then it went to a vocal thing. So it branched out into a vocal thing. And then we would get requests for this and that. And you'd get people coming up asking from anywhere from more of a Americana type thing. So we did a lot of duo things. We took some pop tunes and made them ours. Remember that? Made them ours things. Did Blackbird by the Beatles. We did a couple other Beatles tunes, but we did tunes by the band and made them a little bit more jazz from the jazz angle. The improvisation thing. Instrumental too, unless Michael sang maybe the chorus of the tune. And that's why I asked him. I said, just sing the chorus. Don't sing any verse. I'll play the verse. You know. Yeah. So it's also influenced the arrangement thing, I guess. You know, the whole COVID thing, an arrangement of what I'm going to do for tunes. You know, and again, the whole idea of jazz is the improvisational, creative thing. And I think the way I'm going to deal with some of these tunes that haven't been played out live is go in with not a whole lot of direction for me to give the players in the band. I really love giving everybody their, well, what bass line? What do you want for the bass? What do you feel? You know, that kind of thing. And I think that there has to be a degree of freedom or space and all that in the style of music that I like. And that might just be a jazz-related thing, but yeah.
Right on. Well, David, thank you for taking some time out. I appreciate you opening up about your album and this world that we're living through right now and kind of getting into your history, and I look forward to getting you out in front of the Neon Jazz audience.
Thank you, Joe. Joe, the other thing, too, I didn't mention, you know, my website, which I really try to keep current, there's access to everything there, the davidhowardmusic.com. I changed, my band is called the Dave Howard Initiative. There's merch and all that for that. You can get the CD off the website. It's on the website, but there's also Bandcamp on the website. You can get it off of any favorite streaming outlets. Listen, my brother, stay healthy. Pleasure, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players and educators in Boston, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to David for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Go get some. Neon Jazz.